The girl was naked, shaken by the stone well. When the mountain man stepped out of the dust, her knees were in the dirt, her arms crossed tight over her chest, and she didn't scream when she saw him. Caleb Rourke stopped a few paces away, his shadow falling over her like a verdict. From a distance, it looked like another man had found her alone and was about to do whatever men did out here. He didn't look gentle. He kept his eyes up because any decent man knew where not to look. Caleb had buried a small grave years ago, a child taken by fever before he could do a damn thing. Since then, he'd learned this truth. A man can survive hunger and cold, but not the memory of walking away. He was tall, broad-shouldered, near 50, with a beard burned pale by the sun and eyes that never asked permission. Caleb stood there too long, staring, while the girl shrank back against the well stones, as if she'd learned that stillness hurt less. Caleb finally moved. He crouched slowly, close enough that she flinched, and reached toward her with a hand scarred by rope and steel. The girl's breath broke, her voice thin and raw, and she whispered something that froze him in place. My father did that every night. He didn't touch her either. His eyes dropped to her wrist, where dark marks circled the skin, old and new, laid one over another like someone had measured them carefully. He looked past her then, at the well. There was a chain hanging loose from the stone lip, polished smooth by use, and a hook sunk deep where no animal ever needed one. The wood planks braced around the well mouth were newer than the rest of the ranch, cut clean, nailed recent. This wasn't a place someone stumbled into trouble. This was a place trouble came back to night after night. The girl watched his face closely now, waiting for the next thing men always chose. Caleb felt the old weight settle in his chest, the same one he'd felt years ago, when he'd ridden past another woman and told himself it wasn't his fight. Slowly, carefully, Caleb shrugged out of his coat, turned his body sideways so she could see his hands, and set it down near her without a word. The girl didn't reach for it right away. Out here, kindness always came with a price, and she'd already paid more than she had. Caleb stayed where he was, knees bent, eyes level, the well creaking softly in the heat behind them. For the first time in a long while, he knew something simple and heavy as stone. If he rode away now, she wouldn't be alive when summer ended. Caleb didn't speak as he led her away from the well. He walked slow, keeping his body between her and the open yard, like he expected someone to step out of the dust at any moment. Lila wrapped herself in the coat at last, the fabric hanging loose on her small frame, and followed with bare feet that barely stirred the dirt. Caleb knew how stories started out here, and how fast they turned ugly. He put her on his horse, careful and quiet, then walked beside them instead of riding, holding the reins like a man with nothing to hide. They reached the edge of Lander as the sun slid low, the heat easing just enough for people to come back outside. He stopped near the sheriff's office, not to go in, but to see who came out. That was when Deputy Vernon Pike stepped onto the boardwalk, boots clean, smile ready, like he'd been waiting. Pike asked a few easy questions, where they'd come from, if the girl was sick, if Caleb needed help. His voice was friendly, but his eyes stayed on Lila's wrist, a little too long. Lila's fingers dug into the coat, her breath quickening, and Caleb felt it through the reins. He said she needed rest, said he'd take her to a woman he trusted. And Pike nodded like it all made sense. Too much sense. As Caleb turned away, Pike glanced at her wrists again, then asked like it was nothing. Your pa know you're out here. Miss ain't no trouble, right? His smile stayed friendly, but his eyes didn't. Caleb didn't answer. He left Lila with a widow on the edge of town, a woman who asked no questions and set a kettle on without a word. Before Caleb left, he pressed a note into the widow's hand. If trouble comes, send a telegraph to the marshal in Rawlins. Fast. Walking back alone, Caleb felt the weight of the place pressed down on him. Lander looked peaceful at dusk, but peace like that always cost someone. At the saloon, Silas Hart was already there, sitting calm, smiling slow, as if nothing in the world could surprise him. Caleb didn't sit. Silas talked about weather, about cattle, about daughters who didn't know their place. He talked like a man, certain the ground wouldn't shift under his boots. When Caleb stepped back into the street, the sky had gone dark, and he knew something else. That girl wasn't missing. She was being hunted. Caleb didn't sleep that night. Earlier, he'd noticed fresh boot prints near the widow's steps. Too neat for the usual town traffic. He'd told himself it was nothing, 'cause tired men lie to themselves like that. He sat on the edge of the widow's porch, listening to boards creak, watching the street like a man expecting trouble to choose a door. Near dawn, he went back inside to check on Lila and found the room empty. The window was cracked, the kettle cold, and muddy boot prints crossed the floor where no guest had walked before. Caleb followed the tracks to the stable and saw his horse uneasy, ears pinned, rope cut clean. Someone had come quiet, and someone had known exactly where to look. He moved fast then, not running, just steady, the way men do when anger's already decided. And there was no time left for talk. At the edge of town, two men stepped out from behind the corral fence, blocking the road like it was nothing personal. They smiled the kind of smile that asked for compliance, not conversation. Caleb tried to pass anyway. The first punch came quick, hard, and it landed in his gut. Caleb folded for a breath, not from weakness, but to buy a second. He grabbed a loose fence post, swung it low, and took the man's legs out from under him. The second man grabbed for his coat, and Caleb twisted free, drove him into the fence, and kept moving. By the time it ended, Caleb was breathing heavy, knuckles split, and the road was open again. One of the men stayed down, coughing, and the other rolled over, swearing, saying things he shouldn't have said. He said the girl talked too much. He said the old man kept things under the well. He said everyone knew not to look. That was when the pieces finally locked together. The chains, the new boards, the fear that came from a place deeper than bruises. Caleb turned back toward the ranch as the sun lifted, slow and red, over the plains. He didn't ride straight in. He waited for dark, because men like Silas watch the road. Hit like and subscribe. Then stay with me, because what Caleb finds under that well will change everything he thinks he knows about that girl and the man hunting her. Caleb reached the ranch just after dark, when the heat finally loosened its grip and the land went quiet in a way that never meant peace. The place looked calm from the road, lanterns low, animals settled, nothing out of order. That was what made it dangerous. He left his horse in the trees and went the rest on foot, circling wide, moving the way men do when they expect to be seen and do not intend to be stopped. The stone well sat where it always had, solid and patient, like it had been waiting. Up close, the signs were clearer. The chain was still warm from use, and the hook was sunk deeper than any bucket ever needed. Caleb eased the boards loose and felt cool air rise from below, carrying a smell that did not belong to water. He climbed down slow, boots finding old notches in the stone, hands steady despite the ache in his shoulders. Below the well mouth, the ground opened into a low space cut by hand, shored up with rough beams. Crates were stacked along the wall. Caleb opened one bundle and understood at once: land deeds, names, amounts, and debts that could ruin a man without a single bullet. Then he found the part that made his mouth go dry. Folded letters, old and stained, written by women who never made it to town, each one begging someone to notice. And among the neat entries, written clean and careful, was the name Vernon Pike. Footsteps sounded above, light shifted, voices followed, close now, confident. Silas Hart spoke first, calm as ever, talking about how things had gone too far. Deputy Pike answered, voice thin with hurry, saying they needed to finish it tonight. Caleb climbed back up into the yard just as they rounded the well. Silas saw him and smiled like a man greeting bad weather. He could wait out. Pike reached for his gun and stopped when he saw the papers in Caleb's hand. The yard filled fast with men pulled from sleep and drink, drawn by the promise of trouble. Silas talked about family. Pike talked about law. Caleb said nothing. When the first man rushed him, Caleb met him head on, drove him back with a shoulder and a fist, and kept moving. The fight spread quick. Boots slipped in dust. Lanterns fell. Someone went down hard and didn't get back up. Caleb took a blow to the ribs and answered with one that cracked a bone. in the chaos. Lila stepped into the light. Her voice cut through it all, clear and shaken, telling them what happened every night at the well, telling them why she was never allowed to leave. For a moment, no one moved. Then Pike shouted for her to be taken, and that was when a whistle sounded from the road, a long one, official. Caleb looked toward the gate and knew the next few minutes would decide who walked away free and who never would. The whistle carried weight, the kind that stopped men mid-step and made lies fall quiet. The widow's telegraph reached the marshal just in time. A U.S. Marshal rode through the gate with 2 men behind him, dust on their coats and law in their eyes. Deputy Pike reached for his badge, then froze when the marshal read his name from the papers Caleb held. Silas Hart tried to speak, tried to call it family business, but the words died when the chains in the well were brought into the light. Lila stood straight for the first time that night, her voice steady now, as she told the truth she had carried alone for years. No one interrupted her. Some men looked away, some stayed very still. By sunrise, Pike was in irons. Silas was no longer shouting, and the ranch was quieter than it had ever been. Lila didn't cry when they took her father away. She breathed. That was enough. Caleb watched from a distance, ribs aching, hands swollen. Knowing he had not fixed the world, he had only stood where he once would have ridden past. Caleb knew real men don't ride past trouble. They face it, even when it hurts. Not for praise, but because someone has to be the line that holds. A man answers to God for what he walks away from, and Caleb wasn't about to carry that weight again. Before leaving town, he spoke to the widow, made sure Lila would not be alone, and left his camp location written careful on a scrap of paper. He did not promise to stay. He promised to answer if she ever called. Out here, that mattered more. Some stories end with gunfire. This one ended with a choice. The choice to step in when silence feels easier. The choice to believe someone, even when the truth costs comfort. If you were in Caleb's place, would you have stopped? And if you were in Lila's place, who would you pray noticed? If this story stayed with